And that's why I actually didn't connect it to the other dots, is because I wasn't completely sure what that represented. Maybe the 99 centimeters that came before it was the outlier, and maybe the 97 was the more accurate. You know, I just didn't feel like I had enough information to really say with certainty which were the accurate dots and which were the outlier dots.
Fair, and so it's best to provide all of the data so that you can see the outliers better, correct?
Well, except that makes growth charts really confusing to look at.
Well, but we wouldn't want to mislead people in any way, correct?
No.
So when you're looking at this, and we look at the trend of the trajectory, you would agree with me that if we are going in and trying to find a line that curves through these dots, like we do in statistics, we would wind up tracking pretty consistently with him still continuing to grow.
I don't think you can say that from all these dots that are all over the place after his 4th birthday.
Okay. Well, and this isn't after his 4th birthday, right? This is before, I mean, your chart starts before his 4th birthday.
No, but after his 4th birthday is when we start getting all these outliers.
Well, okay. That's because that's the data you have. I mean, you don't know what there was only 2 data points between that you've included. I didn't go back behind the 4th birthday, correct? We were only, anyway, let me just continue. The point is that what I hear you saying is you cannot make a conclusion one way or the other whether or not he was actually growing during that time period.
Well, it certainly looks like he was on an upward trend that started by his 3rd birthday, the very first point back there, and because it looks really consistent with the next dot when he was 3.5, and that looks pretty consistent with the dot when he was about 4.5. That one.
Okay.
And so consistency is one of the tools that we use to try to figure out when we have all these outliers like this, is what seems to be the most consistent set of data. So those 3 to me looked like the most consistent.
All right. And so you're not trying to tell this jury, though, that he had stopped growing height-wise, correct? Because you don't have data to support that.
That's correct. I don't think we have data to support anything after about his age 4.5, give or take.
So then, earlier, State showed you State's Exhibit 94. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And asked, did you have any concerns? And you said, I believe you said something about the shoulder blades and possibly the ribs showing, correct?
Yes.
All right. And then you, in response to Defendant's Exhibit 31, said you had less concerns, correct? All right. Now, do you have any concerns in regards to Defendant's Exhibit 32? Sorry. Can you see that I can't see from back?
Yeah.
Here, do you need me to hand you the photo?
Yeah, it's pretty glary from over here.
Yeah, it's a little hard to see.
I'm not sure there's a concern there. I mean, in this picture, he looks like a skinny kid, but just going off a picture with no other data, I'm not sure that it's enough to really express a strong concern.
Okay. And I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 22. And do you have any concerns there?
Same observation. He looks a little skinny, but particularly with clothes on, which of course is going to decrease our ability to give an opinion on this topic. I don't know that there's a specific concern to express.
And you see the buccal fat on his face? What is buccal fat? Sorry.
Well, that refers to the fatty tissue that most of us have here in our cheeks.
Okay. And does he have buccal fat?
Let me see. Yeah, I think he probably does.
Okay. And does he have buccal fat here on Defendant's Exhibit 32?
Probably. Yeah, I think there's probably some there.
Okay. Now, you spoke earlier about this. I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 219. Can you see that? It's the BMI for age boys.
Jody, that hasn't been admitted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought y'all had admitted it. I apologize.
Was it used as a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I thought you, okay.
I don't think they admitted to
Can you check?
State's Exhibit 219 was only identified, marked for identification.
Oh,
It was not
okay.
admitted.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and this is your representation of a chart that you've looked at, correct?
Yes, I put the dot down there.
Okay. And you estimated where that dot should go. It wasn't done through a computer or anything. You were just eyeballing it, correct?
I guess you could say that, yeah.
And so, but this is a chart that would generally be relied on in your field and professional field?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to admit State's Exhibit 219.
State's Exhibit 219 is admitted and may be published.
So, we're showing you the chart, and you would agree with me that you've only found one BMI on the chart, correct? You've only logged one data point.
So I think there's more BMIs in the records. I was only asked to chart that one.
I understand. I understand that they can be calculated, but would you agree this only has one data point, right?
That I would agree with.
Yeah. And, would you agree with me that that you have not come to the court with a chart that tracks the child's BMI?
That's correct.
And you believe that the BMI is significant because it can tell you more about the child, not just the child's. Well, why is it significant? Why is BMI significant?
So it's calculated in a way that the individual variations due to like body type or body shape, it's not influenced as much by that versus it sets up a standard that's more reliably compared to the rest of the population.
Okay, so like it compares height to weight. So if you had a really tall person who is skinny or a short person who's overweight, fat, I don't want to use fat, but fat, overweight, it takes into consideration their stature potentially.
Well, it is a way of measuring weight for height, but if you just compare the weight to the height, that is overly influenced by body shape. And so the body mass index, BMI, irons that out a little bit, so there's less, it's less influenced by the factors that you mentioned, that someone can be tall and thin but normal versus short and overweight or normal. So it's from our point of view, it's a more reliable way to compare a person to the general population.
Okay. And so you did not, let me ask you this, do doctors also rely on BMI in their everyday practice if they've only seen a child once?
I mean, it's a measurement that's relied on routinely by physicians. And I would say, even if we only have one BMI point, we certainly look at it and see if it is at a level that needs some sort of action. But it's really, I believe what you're referring to is that it's really the trend over time that's more important. Is the BMI going up, meaning the person's gaining more weight? Is the BMI going down? Is the person losing weight, etc.?
All right, and so, but you didn't track, you didn't feel like that was, well, you've looked at Dr. Molina's autopsy, correct?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that she only provides one BMI in her autopsy.
Yes.
And that, are you aware of any other chart that she's made that tracks the BMI over time?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. But BMI is an important figure, data set to consider when you are considering whether a child is malnourished or not, correct?
Well, it's completely unreliable under the age of 4, so it's not used in that age group. So, and the issue we had with Benji's points in and around his 4th birthday and after were the heights were clearly unreliable. They're outliers all over the place. And so if your height is unreliable, your BMI is going to be unreliable.
So the chart that was just admitted for State Exhibit 219 BMI for age for boys that you just went off of goes from 2 to 5 years old, correct?
That chart does, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's not just for 4-year-old boys, or it's for a whole data set between 2 to 5.
Well, you can calculate it at birth. I mean, it's just a calculation, but what we found out through the years that it's not reliable for clinical use until after the 4th birthday.
Okay. So when we're talking about things that you evaluate in considering starvation, there's the intentional starvation, and would you agree, there's an unintentional starvation?
Yes.
And some of what can factor in determining unintentional starvation might be education, someone's education and not knowing what needs to be done, what foods are most nutritious to help a child, correct?
Well, once again, I would argue that it's more the volume of food that's given or not given to the child. Especially in a country like the U.S., food is generally nutritious, at least to the extent of not starving to death. And so if a child is getting a reasonable amount of food, they're not going to starve to death.
So if you have parents that are reporting on 7/21/2021 that the child is eating but has had difficulty putting on weight and had needed nutritional supplement like shakes, and you're looking at a child it doesn't weigh very much, it would be real easy to just say, hey, you know what, let's just make sure that he's getting the right nutrients and to hook him up to an IV to see if it's the parent's fault or it's a failure of the child's metabolic system, correct?
Well, an IV is not going to tell you information about that because an IV is basically water and salt. So that's not going to correct undernutrition. So the approach to that would be to admit the child to the hospital and have objective observers see whether or not the child actually eats and how much they're eating and appropriate amounts, etc. And so that you're not relying on one or two reports from someone who may not be telling you the truth.
Okay. And so, but there's a way to rule that out, that you could address it medically if you needed to, correct?
Yeah, if it's a really big concern and no other option seems appropriate at the time, then putting the child in the hospital would be a step. But an ER doc who's never seen the child before wouldn't know what other approaches have been taken or have not been taken by the primary care doctor or other doctors.
And so Dr. Henry, as the departure plan pointed out, says, and you need to follow up with your pediatrician, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that the parents follow up with a pediatrician the very next week.
Yes, it looks like they did.
And that pediatrician also did not recommend that the child go and see anyone in regards to food consumption or concerns of malnutrition.
Well, actually, when the parents brought him in to see Dr. Lopez on July the 26th, they didn't even ask about weight. It was the ears that concerned them.
Did they weigh the child?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the same pediatrician that had seen him for his 4-year well check, correct?
Right.
And the eyes are still, he still has black eyes at that time, correct?
I'm sorry, and at the 4-year well check in December?
No, it's just on 7/26/2021, Benji still had black eyes, correct?
Well, that's not really clear from this because Dr. Lopez wrote eyes normal.
Okay. If a photo has been admitted into evidence on 7/26, that was taken 7/26/2021, and you can still see the black eyes, then they would be present at that time, correct?
I would assume so. Apparently Dr. Lopez wasn't really sure about that, but... Oh, no, he did say, I'm sorry, I apologize, contusion under both eyes bilaterally, so he did notice it.
Okay, so, and Dr. Lopez was aware that CPS was involved.
Yes.
Okay. So the child is being looked at considerably by trained medical professionals for child use, yes?
Well, I don't know if they told him about Center for Miracles being involved or not. He just says CPS called and wants medical records.
Well, and I understand that, but my point is that if Child Protective Services is involved, then you would also believe that they are aware.
Judge, I'm going to object to calls for speculation.
I'll move along. Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, so would you agree with me that if someone is not being fed sufficiently, and they would start, and it gets to be a serious situation, that they are actually going to start having negative effects on their bodily organs?
A serious level of malnutrition, yes, has negative effects on bodily organs.
Okay. And would you agree with me that at least on all of the medical records that you reviewed when Benji went to the doctor, there was no report of any negative effects on his bodily organs?
Well, certainly none that were labeled as such.
Okay? You have no problems with his vital functions at any of those 3 visits in July, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you have testified that the loss of that generally in starvation cases you will have a loss of tissue underneath the skin, correct?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that you have fatty tissue. That fatty tissue is all over. It's in our faces, it's in our abdomens, our arms, legs, and everywhere else.
Pretty much.
And that certain kinds of rashes may develop if you are experiencing starvation.
Correct.
Okay. And is that because starvation, or why is that? Why? What are the rashes?
I'm not really sure why they develop, but it probably has to do with changes in the skin, like less moisture in the skin and things of that nature. But beyond that, I can't tell you specifically why skin changes are part of starvation.
And then that if you are being starved, that you're increasingly less able to carry on your normal activities.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that and as it becomes more and more extreme, you may not even be able to get up and walk or to do certain things like that because you've lost so much muscle that your body's incapable of doing it.
Correct.
Now, you noted that the hair starts falling out and becomes thinner and thinner and more breakable as a sign of starvation.
Yes.
And then in this term, there's 2 types of starvation, or I guess, is it malnutrition or starvation? The kwashiorkor? Can you pronounce that name for me?
Kwashiorkor? Yes.
Okay, thank you. Kwashiorkor and okay, I'm gonna spell this and make sure that when you hand you it, can tell me if it's spelled correctly. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
okay? And Your Honor, can I, as a demonstrative, just to show the spelling of the word publish?
Do you have any objections?
No.
Okay, yes, that's fine.
And then on, what is kwashiorkor?
So that kwashiorkor is a type of malnutrition where the person is still having access to carbohydrates, not necessarily a normal amount, but at least some, but is not having access to protein or fat. So they are getting some calories and a little bit of nutrition, but it's a very skewed kind of nutrition that really doesn't provide optimal conditions for the body to grow. And these are children that you may have seen photos of from West Africa, which is where this is seen the most, where they are very underweight and very weak and everything else, but have very distended bellies.
Okay, and then what is the other kind?
The other kind is called marasmus, M-A-R-A-S-M-U-U-S.
Okay, and so this, can I put distended belly under this term? Would that set it apart from this one?
Yeah, that's kind of the characteristic feature of it. And they also tend to have very significant skin changes as well.
Okay, and should I put skin changes as well?
You can. And they also have more dramatic hair changes while we're at it. Their hair typically changes to kind of an orange color and becomes very brittle.
Okay. And then in regards to the marasmus,
Marasmus, yes.
Marasmus.
And we actually, in the U.S., we don't really use the term as much anymore. We call it protein calorie malnutrition,
On which one?
marasmus. And the reason for that is because marasmus is the more typical type of malnutrition where the child's just not getting any nutrition at all, essentially. So it's not just the carbs they're missing out on, but they're missing out on protein and fat. So it's a global kind of malnutrition that is more typical for children that we see here in the U.S.
So, tell me the term y'all use again.
Protein,
Uh-huh. Okay.
calorie, malnutrition.
Okay, and you said this is more of a global,
It just means global malnutrition. Like, in other words, the children are not getting any significant nutrient. And it's more the typical kind that we see here in the U.S.
okay, and so in regards to Benji's case, did he have kwashiorkor or did he have marasmus?
He had marasmus.
Okay. And so we're focused on this one, right?
Yes.
Marasmus. And are there any special, like, things that we look for under marasmus that we don't, that are different?
Well, they don't have the distended belly. If anything, it's the opposite. They have going in belly, a concave belly, and because it just represents weight loss. You know, they're just losing weight over every part of their body. They also can have hair and skin changes, but they're not as dramatic as with kwashiorkor. They're a little more subtle, but over time, they start losing hair as well, and they start getting skin rashes.
Okay, so they can also, so the skin change and hair change and rashes are not just for kwashiorkor, it can also happen here.
Well, it's more dramatic with kwashiorkor, but it definitely happens with marasmus as well, especially as it becomes more severe.
Okay. Now, when you said that the newborn testing that they did for screening for genetic metabolic concern, they do a newborn testing. Why do they do that?
They look for 55 genetic or metabolic conditions that can seriously affect a child's health.
Okay, and in reviewing the records, do you recall normally they do 2 screens, right?
Right.
And did you ever see a second screen for Benji?
I think I only saw one.
Okay, and why would you need a second screen? Why do they do 2 screens?
Well, in the ordinary situation where a baby's born and goes home the next day or the day after that with a parent, they haven't had enough protein feeds yet to really develop those metabolic pathways that are being tested. And so typically when a baby comes back in for its 2-week checkup, they go back to the hospital and have a second test. Now, since Benji was there for longer than just a couple of days, it's possible that had something to do with why only one was done, but I honestly don't know that for sure. And it's entirely possible that he had a second one, but the results were just in a different place or something like that.
And so let's talk about metabolic issues that can arise after birth. Can you get metabolic disorders after birth?
There are a couple, there aren't very many, but there are a couple of metabolic conditions that can develop later in life.
And what are those?
Well, the most common one would be diabetes. The thyroid gland can develop problems later in life. That's called acquired hypothyroidism. And I guess there are a couple of other hormone-related ones. There's one called Cushing's syndrome, Addison's disease, and a few more. But they're pretty, with the exception of diabetes, they're pretty uncommon, especially in children, and are usually present in such a way that they can be identified fairly quickly.
Okay, and what are some of the symptoms of diabetes?
It's called, the classic ones that we look for. And I'm going to say that there's two kinds of diabetes, and I'm going to talk about type 1 diabetes, which is the kind that usually presents in childhood. And the symptoms are drinking too much, drinking a lot, eating a lot, and urinating a lot.
Okay, and what would be a high blood sugar for a young 4-year-old, or for a 4-year-old?
Pretty much the same as in adults, over 100.
And if Benjamin did have that and somebody missed it, could that cause starvation and death?
No, it's a different kind of death.
Did you testify previously regarding that same question and answer yes?
Well, I did testify previously about this issue and whether Benji had it. I don't remember that specific question being asked.
Would it help to refresh your recollection to see
Sure.
your statement?
Okay. Only when he was dying, and if Benjamin did have that. Well, it could certainly cause death if someone missed it. Starvation probably isn't the right word.
Okay, but if somebody missed that Benji had diabetes, it could cause death, correct?
It would cause death to miss type 1 diabetes, but typically it would be over the course of a week and a half or 2 weeks at the most. It wouldn't be something that took 9 months to develop.
Now, would you agree with me that in your specialization in child abuse, diabetes isn't really your focus? Is that correct?
Well, it is in the setting of medical neglect. Like if a family is not getting the diabetes treated, we would certainly get involved with that.
Okay, and so, are you aware that Benji received CPR in this case?
Yes, I am.
And that he had EMS came out to him?
Yes.
And that he had a finger stick glucose of 300?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And is it possible he had diabetes?
Well, I mean, I guess it's possible he developed some form of diabetes as a terminal event, like as he was dying. But once again, diabetes doesn't, it doesn't take months for type 1 diabetes to kill somebody. It takes weeks. So that the time frame is not consistent with diabetes for what happened the last few months of Benji's life.
Now, did you testify previously that in response to, is it possible he had diabetes? Yes, it is possible.
I believe that's an inconsistent statement. I'm going to object to the form.
I'll overrule it. You can answer it if you can.
Well, I mean, I'd feel more comfortable if I could see the transcript of that. Yes, I did say it was possible.
have a rapid onset, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that he had 214 glucose level at the ER on 8/17/2021?
I remember that it was elevated. I don't remember the exact number.
Would it help to see your card?
214, yes,
Is that a high level?
it is.
Now, I need to show you what it I've marked here as the EMS records from August 17th, 2021. Would you agree with me that they indicate that they did perform a suction?
A suction? Yes.
Okay, thank you. And would you agree with me that in addition to the EMS doing a suction on Benji, the ER doctor also did a suction of the contents, of the internal contents of his stomach?
Yes.
I pass the witness.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Luke, I want to show you first what's already been admitted, State's Exhibit number 103, which is the records from the communicative pediatrician. Is what I'm showing you State's Exhibit number 103, that newborn health stream?
Second test, yes, there it is. Okay.
Okay.
That is what that means.
So there's that second test, and he's negative, right?
Correct, everything was normal.
Okay. So again, that's for the 55 potential metabolic genetic conditions.
Correct.
How does one die from type 1 diabetes?
So, type 1 diabetes means that the body just suddenly loses the ability to make insulin from the pancreas, and so it can't absorb glucose out of the bloodstream into the organs. And so glucose is what all of our organs live on every day, and so things start going badly very quickly once glucose is not available to the rest of the body. And so one thing that happens is the blood sugar builds up to very high levels and starts pulling water out of the body in the form of urine because of those high glucose levels. The second thing is the body starts looking around for other energy sources and starts metabolizing fat, in particular like crazy, which releases a waste product called ketones. And ketones are very toxic to the body at high levels. And so the ultimate cause of death with untreated type 1 diabetes is basically severe dehydration and what's called ketoacidosis.
Okay. Talking about ketoacidosis, would you expect if somebody has ketoacidosis, there would be ketones in the blood?
I would.
What about acetone?
Acetone is one of the ketones, so yes.
So if Dr. Molina testified that she drew the blood and there was no acetone, what would that indicate to you?
That he wasn't having ketoacidosis.
It would not have died from type 1 diabetes.
Correct. Really a fatal case of type 1 diabetes would always involved ketoacidosis, and so if it wasn't there, then the cause of death was something else.
I want to talk about the records as it relates to the ER visit on 7/21 of 21. First of all, are you aware of who does coding? Meaning the codes that are entered in the medical records.
It's a clerical function, like in other words, the hospital or the emergency room's clerical staff, after the fact, codes the visit, and it's part of the billing process.
Okay, so is it a doctor who enters in codes?
Well, it depends on the environment. I can tell you that the ER docs very rarely are the ones who enter their coding.
Okay, so I want to show you the record on 7/21 of 21. What is, I'm sorry, I'm going to spell it Hirsutism.
Hirsutism,
Yes.
that means excessive body hair.
Could that also be consistent with lanugo?
Yes, it could.
And again, lanugo is consistent with the malnutrition.
Correct.
And again, that was the ER visit on 7/21 of 21.
Correct.
So I want to look at, I'm sorry, again, the record on 7/21 of 21. So in that, where it says, has child had poor weight gain over the last few months? It says no. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Did Benji go to the Chosic ER prior to 7/21 of 21?
Yes.
And what was his weight then?
Let's see, he had an ER visit on, I believe it was in April,
April 1st, I believe?
or March 25th and April 1st. So he had 2 ER visits earlier that year.
Okay, let's look at the one closest to that, 4/1 of 21. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes. Sorry, let me get to it real quick. For 1 of 21, he weighed 14.6 kilograms.
Okay, is that consistent with the child having that he's not having poor weight gain over the last few months?
Well, on July 21st, he weighed 13.8, so he actually lost, as I think has been pointed out, almost, what would that be, almost a kilo. So he actually lost 2 pounds from April to July, so it would not be consistent with normal weight gain, obviously.
Right, and that's at the same facility, right?
Correct.
Okay. These types of, do you need to see it again, that what I'm talking about, these screens that are entered in sometimes?
Oh, I don't have a copy of that.
Okay. Are a lot of things just kind of like clicking when you're going through the record, whether maybe doing intake on somebody?
Yes, they're done very quickly, but I would also point out that the information is obtained from the parent or guardian who comes with the child.
Right, and then in that, you can look below that. Does it talk about eating, the child eating?
It does.
What does it say?
The question is, has child been eating/feeding less in the last few weeks? And the answer that's recorded is no.
Okay, so the parents at that point do not report that there's been feeding issues and that there's no weight gain issues.
According to the record.
Okay. Ms. Sawyers was asking you questions as it relates to starvation and being able to carry on with daily activities. Is there some nuance to that?
I think so. I mean, starvation happens over a period of time in most cases. You know, it's a gradual process. It's not, in most cases, it's not that someone locks a child in the closet and then they don't get fed at all after that. It's a process of being fed too little, infrequently, things of that nature. And so it's a gradual loss of weight. And what you get with that is also a gradual loss of function. So it's not like from one day to the next they suddenly can't walk or something like that. It's a gradual weakening of the body over time.
Well, in somebody that's malnourished, have you seen cases where they can still walk?
Yes.
They can still talk?
Yes.
So just because the fact that a child is walking and talking does not mean that they are not malnourished.
Correct.
She asked you about negative effects on the bodily function in prior visits. Is there enough information in the records for you to definitively say one way or another as it relates to his bodily organs?
I don't feel that there is enough information in the medical record. A lot of these are ER visits. The focus is on something else. The pediatrician visits, even there the focus was on something else, usually ear infections, which was also happening a lot to Benji that year. And so that was generally the reason that he was being brought in.
When we were talking about BMI and charting it specifically as it related to State's Exhibit number 219, the Z-scores that we filled out, or the Z-scores that we filled out for the BMI at his death. Why didn't you chart the BMI?
I apologize. There was actually an exhibit that was right here that now I'm not seeing, and I just want to make sure it isn't getting lost in my paperwork or someplace else.
This one?
No, it was this one, but without the extra marks.
I think the Sawyer put it here on the,
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure it was in a safe place. That's all.
That's what I'm referring to, State's Exhibit number 219, this particular exhibit.
Okay.
When charting BMI, you have to take into account the height, right?
Yes.
And so we've already discussed the height that you looked at was spurious, is that fair to say?
Well, starting around age 4, it certainly looks like that at least some of the heights were not accurate because there are these outliers all over the place. So if you can't trust the height measurement, the BMI is not going to be trustworthy either.
So looking at Defense Exhibit number 41, I want to go to the new portions here. In your opinion, is it likely that Benji was getting shorter, getting taller, getting shorter and taller on the same day and getting taller?
No.
Okay. And is it this type of sporadic jumps in the record prevent you from relying on the height as much.
Correct.
As it relates to self-harm that was indicated in the record on the Joseph visit in 7/21 of 21, to your recollection, did you see any other medical records that indicated that Benji was engaging in self-harming behavior? On the ER record from August the 17th, the day that he died, Dr. Kumar, who was the treating physician that day, made a note this is from the she made a note that on the prior ER visit, the parents reported Benji had a history of self-harming behavior. And also on that day, it's noted that the stepmother described numerous episodes where Benji was trying to make himself throw up. So other than the 7/21 and the 8/17, did you ever see any other medical records to indicate that the parents are reporting that Benji is engaging in self-harming behavior?
No.
So, Ms. Boyers went over with you some pictures and asked, is there buccal fat in this photograph? My question to you is that even on the day of his, let's say the picture on the right, does he still have buccal fat on in that picture?
Is there a way that I could see the picture itself?
I only have this one digital, but I can rotate
Oh,
the
okay.
TV for you.
Well, can I step
Is there
down
any
and look
step
at
down,
it?
Judge?
Yes, sir.
Well, he definitely has buccal fat there. You can see his cheeks are nice and round. Here you kind of get an idea that he may not, because you do have a little, kind of like a little concave imprint right there. So I would say it certainly appears to be less buccal fat than in the picture on the left.
Right, and that's my point, is that what we're looking at is the change in the buccal fat. Is that fair to say?
There's definitely a change, in my opinion.
And can somebody still have buccal fat and be a child, still have buccal fat and still be diet or suffer from malnutrition, starvation?
Yes. Once again, I'm sure that it's really kind of a gradient where you don't suddenly lose it one day. It gradually diminishes over some period of time. So yes, I think it is possible to be malnourished and still have a little bit of buccal fat.
Okay.
Here's another one.
I'll pass this one, Judge.
Ms. Sawyers, do you have a lot? I'm just debating whether to take our afternoon break now. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and take an afternoon break.
All rise for the jury.
for calling your attention to the screen, the picture on the right, would you agree that with his arms raised, his mouth is in a puckered position to put around the water bottle, correct?
Yes.
And so depending on the position you put your body can change the angles as well as the pull of your skin in an unnatural way to make you look skinnier in some photos. And as you can see on the left, he has his arms down and you can't really tell, but you can look, the way that your body's positioned can make you look more gaunt than in others, correct?
Maybe to a certain extent. I really don't think it could cause that dramatic of a difference between the two pictures.
So, So I want to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 31. And you testified earlier that you had less concerns over this photo, correct?
Yes.
And you see, would you agree with me that he's showing buccal fat?
It looks like it, yes.
Okay. And that the angle of this photo, even though he has his shirt off, is more similar in facial expression to how the photo on the left looked, correct? Because he was smiling in both photos.
Oh, well, that's true.
And so it's hard to compare these different body statures when your face is sucking on a bottle versus when you're smiling, right? It gives you two different presentations.
Yes, it's going to be a different presentation.
And then when we went back to Defendant's Exhibit 32, you can see that you would agree that he's not wearing anything that's covering his arms, correct?
Yes?
Okay. Do you know what date that photo was taken?
No.
Okay. Do you know what date this photo was taken? The Defendant's 31.
I don't. I'm not.
Do you know
Not for
what
certain.
date this photo was taken? Defendant's Exhibit 22.
I know.
Would it surprise you to learn that this is the photo of Benjamin on the date that he passed?
Yes, that is a little bit surprising.
So, I want to ask you, what are some other ways that someone can pass away that, for instance, suffocation? We heard testimony from Dr. Molina yesterday that she cannot rule out suffocation. Did y'all consider suffocation in this case?
I did not.
She also said that she cannot rule out arrhythmia. Did y'all consider arrhythmia in this case?
I did not. I don't recall if they got any EKG tracings on him before he died. I don't think they did. So I'm sure, I don't think it was ruled out in this case.
And you would agree with me, or are you aware that you can do genetic testing to, after the fact to determine whether someone will be predisposed to a genetic arrhythmia?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And that was not done here. Are you aware that it was not done here?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
So in evaluating this case, have you evaluated it for anything other than starvation?
I have to say, my evaluation actually began when the autopsy report came back, and, at that point, it was pretty self-evident, that he was severely underweight, and that the other findings that we've talked about strongly supported that diagnosis, and I had no reason to question it.
All right, so the answer is no, you didn't consider any other possibility, correct?
Well, none seem to be evident from the available information, so based on that, I would say no. I did not consider other conditions.
In your review of this case, you did not review the CPS records, correct?
No, correct.
You did not review the body-worn camera that captures Benji talking to the officers on July 20th, 2021, correct?
Correct.
And you did not review the recordings of him talking to CPS on 7/20/2021, correct?
I did not, correct.
Did you review the recordings of Leo talking to the CPS records on 8/17/2021?
Of Leo?
Yeah, do you know?
The sibling? I did not.
And so if there was an outcry that Miranda had hit the mouth of Benji and blood was coming out by Leo, you didn't review that?
I was not aware of that.
So that none of that came into your consideration, right?
No, have to say no.
And let's talk about the things in the report about, Dr. Molina, you have, according to you, gone and looked at other cases that were alleged to have starvation in them, and you would agree with me that one of the things that they look at is growth arrest lines on the x-rays of these individuals, correct?
Correct.
And was that done here?
I really don't know. The x-rays were taken by the medical examiner, and I don't know. There's no report in the information that I got about if the x-rays were read, so I don't have an answer to your question.
Okay, so she provided you no details in the autopsy report to say that the growth arrest lines, what she found, if she found anything.
No, it just says a full body radiology study was obtained, but there's no information about how the x-rays were read, if they showed anything.
You would agree with me.
Actually, I take that back. It says, oh no, it doesn't say what the reading was. I'm sorry.
So she took x-rays, but it has no findings. It does address the fact that there's no findings from the x-ray, correct, in the autopsy report?
Well, I thought it might, but actually on rereading it, it doesn't even say that. It just says full body radiographs are performed.
Okay. Now, you would agree with me that there needs to be a distinction between malnourished and starved, right? Because we keep using those terms interchangeably. And right now, this is a very critical, would you agree with me that being accused of starving a child is a very heinous crime?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And so we wouldn't want to confuse being malnourished with starvation, right? Because even though it's a scale of the spectrum, using these terms interchangeably can be very misleading.
I would agree with that. I don't I personally do not look at them as being the same thing, and I don't think in the medical world generally they're looked on as the same thing. Malnourishment is the broader category, and starvation is the more severe end of that.
Okay, so when we talk about, the fact that a child may be malnourished, that is not the same thing as saying they are starved, correct?
I would agree with that.
When we talk about stunting, you would agree that there's no evidence at this stage that you have of stunting?
That's correct. That refers to loss of height potential, and his height had returned to the normal range by age 3.5 or so.
Now, your statement earlier that relied on Dr. Molina finding no ketones, right? That was your, or I apologize. I think the state told you that Dr. Molina said she found no ketones. Did you
Correct.
hear them say that?
Correct.
You didn't say that Dr. Molina found no ketones.
I didn't say that myself. I didn't have that information.
And the reality is that when Dr. Molina does her autopsy, she performs labs, correct?
Correct.
As part of her autopsy, and you review those labs, or the findings, or you can review them.
Yes.
But you also have to look at whether or not the lab was done correctly. Correct?
Well, that's not information that I would typically have, but it is important that the labs be done correctly. I would agree with that.
Yeah, you have to take that into consideration when you are looking at a lab to whether or not you should rely on it or not. Correct?
Well, if information comes to light that the labs were not performed correctly, then that would certainly cast doubt on their reliability. But I did not have any such information.
And are you aware that the labs were not done until over a month after Benji passed?
No, I wasn't aware of that. I'm not too surprised to hear that, but I had not specifically been informed of that.
And that was the labs that were done in-house, and the labs that were done, that they sent off to NMS labs, were not done until almost over 2.5 months later. Would that surprise you?
No, given the backlog in our medical examiner's office, how far behind they are on cases, I'd have to say that doesn't surprise me a lot.
And are you aware that the autopsy in this case was done in August 18, 2021?
Yes.
And that Dr. Molina testified yesterday that her medical examiner's office is under probation starting in August of 2021.
Judge, I'm going to check the mischaracterization. It was a provisional status. I'm going to check the mischaracterization.
Just Dave, if you want to,
No.
I'm sorry, Ms. Sawyer?
I asked her specifically after she used the word provisional status, and she agreed that I said, what month did you go on probation? And she said August of 2021.
Considering the witness, I'll let you ask the question and he can correct you if he knows, if he has personal knowledge.
Are you aware that Dr. Molina's office went on probation in August of 2021?
Actually, now that you mention it, I believe I had heard that, but I don't have any details or any further information.
So I want to talk about the accuracy of labs or the stability of a sample. Let me ask you, in regards to glucose, for instance, is it stable or unstable after it is taken out of the body?
Well, over what period of time, and also whether or not it was frozen. In situations like this, one of the, what am I trying to say? The delay in processing them isn't necessarily a bad thing, assuming the samples were promptly frozen. In that situation, they're stable for quite some time. But I don't have any personal information of whether that was done, when, how long after they were drawn, etc.
But we have admitted as Defendant's Exhibit 33, Dr. Molina's full report of what came from her file, her paper report. And so you would agree with me that it would be important to track the chain of custody of an item, of a sample that you're going to test, correct?
Yes.
And that you track that chain of custody and verify how it's stored, when it's stored, and by whom it's stored, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so if Dr. Molina's file does not include any of that important information, that will be relevant.
I really don't have personal knowledge about the procedures that are followed or need to be followed in a laboratory like that.
But in general, when the chain of custody and how the item, the sample is preserved is important to know, correct?
Oh, yes.
Because it affects the accuracy of the lab result that follows it. Correct?
It definitely pertains to the accuracy of the results. Yes, I would agree.
I pass the witness.
Thank you, Speaker. As it relates to all these questions about the lab, fair to say Dr. Molina would be the better person to ask those questions to, correct?
Definitely.
You didn't review Dr. Molina's testimony, did you, or testifying today?
No.
So you're not aware that Ms. Sawyers didn't ask Dr. Molina any of those questions?
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. She asked you about the body-worn camera that you may or may not have reviewed. So you didn't review any body-worn camera that shows Benji asking his dad for food several times?
I did not.
You didn't review a body-worn camera where Benji is talking to a detective and is distracted by food behind him?
No.
You didn't review that? Okay. As it relates to arrhythmias, did you find any evidence that Benji had any arrhythmic disorder in the medical records?
No, I didn't see any evidence of that. I was looking to see if by chance his heart rate had come back to the point that they were able to get an EKG tracing, but it does not appear that happened.
Okay. So just because, so let's say Benji did have genetic testing afterwards, and the genetic test came back that he has a genetic marker. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's very variable from condition to condition. Sometimes it's just a marker, meaning that maybe there's some increased risk, but it doesn't confirm the diagnosis. But there are a few things where having an abnormal gene may be much more important as a potential cause.
But a genetic marker doesn't mean that you have it, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant to say, is that usually not. Usually it just means that maybe there's some increased risk.
Okay. So the fact that he would have been genetically tested doesn't mean that he didn't have an arrhythmia, even if he did have that marker.
I would agree with that.
As it relates to growth arrest lines, you're not aware of any testing that Dr. Molina or consulting that she may have done as it relates to growth arrest lines, are you?
No, I'm not. The x-rays were obtained that conceivably could have shown whether he had growth arrest lines, but once again, I don't have any indication about who evaluated the x-rays and what they said.
Are growth arrest lines only indicative of starvation?
No.
What also could they be indicative of?
So what they indicate, the growth arrest lines are white lines on the ends of the long bones, like the arms and legs. And they're actually very similar to tree rings in trees. And what it means is that a child's bones stopped growing for a while and then started growing again. And when that happens, there's a white line of calcium that's deposited. And so it's an indicator that growth was temporarily slowed down and then recovered. And we see those really all the time. Like for instance, let's say a child has a severe illness like pneumonia or something and is in the hospital for 2 or 3 weeks. Even that would be enough time to trigger the development of a growth arrest line. So it doesn't always mean starvation. It means basically just that something slowed down the child's growth for some period, and it doesn't really tell you what that was.
Is it necessary in order to make a finding of starvation to find growth arrest lines?
No, I have never seen anything that indicated that that was a requirement to say that a child had been starved.
What I talk about, Ms. Warriors asked you about considering other things, whether you considered this. As part of your analysis, did you exclude or, for lack of a term, exclude other potential reasons to attribute to Benji's starvation? I mean, did you consider type 1 diabetes?
I would have to say no to type 1 diabetes and no to other conditions in general because the information was very consistent with starvation. In other words, we had multiple findings on the autopsy, like the lack of fat and the lack of any significant food material in his intestines, that all pointed back to starvation as being by far the most likely cause.
So if there were other signs pointing to one direction, would you just ignore those?
No. I mean, that's why we review the records like we do and review the autopsy and so forth, is specifically to look and see if the information's consistent with what we're thinking, or if we keep bumping into inconsistencies that don't really fit, well then that tells us we have to keep looking for other causes.
And did you run into those inconsistencies in your review?
No, I have to say I really didn't.
Judge Almas, please.
May this witness be excused?
No, I need to follow up on that last.
Okay.
So no inconsistencies. So let me ask you, if you have a mother or a stepmom who has 4 kids in the house and on very little sleep, newborn baby, potentially has postpartum, and did you review this case at all to see whether or not in a moment she did something to the child for suffocation? Because you didn't consider that theory at all, did you?
Well, we didn't have any indication that would lead us to suspect that. So in answer to the first part of your question, no, we really didn't. I really didn't consider the possibility that a particular individual did or didn't kill Benji, because like for instance in the case that you're talking about, the information that we got from Child Protective Services was that the other children were growing fine, and that none of the other children were having issues with eating disorders and not gaining weight and that sort of thing.
Right, and that's actually a contraindication that this child's not being fed, because other kids are being fed, and there is, so the videos that you watch or what you were shown, at no point did any of that include videos that were made by Miranda that talked about her growing frustration with Benji.
I was made aware of some of that information. I'll be honest with you, I can't, that would most likely have been after I prepared my report for CPS. I don't think I had that information at the time that I was evaluating the autopsy, etc.
Okay, so the fact now that you have become aware of it, I mean, you would agree with me that when you say that there was nothing inconsistent with starvation, that's because you hadn't considered any of that other information that you didn't have access to, that wasn't provided to you, correct?
Well, it's kind of hard to consider something I don't have access to.
Fair. So let me ask you, you talked about the growth arrest lines, but they're not a requirement for defining starvation or finding starvation. But would you agree with me that there is no medical test that we can perform for starvation to rule it in or rule it out?
What I would say is it's a constellation of physical findings and laboratory findings. There's not a single test. There are multiple tests and findings have to be present.
Well, and there's no test for starvation, it's the elimination of other options, right? Because generally speaking, as you have already stated, it is very rare for us to have a claim of pure starvation. Generally, you would die, before you would die of starvation, you would die from some complication from starvation. Is that correct?
I don't think that's necessarily true. The few cases that I've had of where a child dies from starvation, they don't typically have other causes of their death. In other words, like in the third world, you expect that a child will develop pneumonia or some other infection before they die of starvation. But here in the U.S., that's not necessarily true.
Right, because the starvation cases that are generally prosecuted are ones where they are locked up and you know they weren't getting food, right?
That has not been my experience.
The crib death, have you heard of that case?
The crib death?
Well, for instance, when a child is left in a crib and not fed, they know that they weren't getting fed, then it's a very clear indication that it's starvation, right?
Hypothetically. Yes, I mean, I don't know the details of the case you're talking about, so for me, it's a hypothetical case.
So the further we get away from an absolute locking up and failure to be able to access food, the harder it is for us to be sure about starvation. Because there could be other issues, medical issues that are coming into play that if you're not looking for them, you didn't consider them, correct?
Well, I mean, I personally don't think that applies to Benji's case because we certainly did, the ER in particular certainly did obtain the lab that they could obtain at the time. If you look at the physical findings on autopsy, no fat in his body, no food, in his GI tract. His overall physical appearance. I mean, it does not. The findings that we have all point towards starvation.
Okay, so, last point. Defendant's Exhibit 22, this is Benji on the day he passed, 3 hours before he passed. And he had his stomach suctioned out through the through the EMS, correct?
Yes.
He had his stomach suctioned at the ER, correct?
Yes.
He had a bowel movement, a large, hard bowel movement in his diaper at the time of death, correct?
Yes.
He had a full diaper at the time of death, correct?
That's what's recorded.
And he also, there's evidence that he peed in his bed with a huge urine puddle, and that he peed in the car on the way to the hospital. Are you aware of that?
I don't think I had heard that last one, but I had heard the other things that you mentioned.
Right. So when we're looking at all of this, and with our own eyes, just looking at it, it does not look like a case of someone who is locked up and is prevented from getting food. This is a case of something that has been missed.
Judge, I'm going to object to argument that it's not even a lack of question.
I pass the witness.
I just have very few questions, Judge. She spends a lot of time talking about basically restraining the child. Is there another way to prevent a child from getting food?
Yes.
What is that?
Putting a lock on the refrigerator in the cabinet?
Where the food is stored?
Yes.
Okay. I'll pass the witness, Judge.
No further questions at this time.
May Dr. Lucifer be excused?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Lucifer, thank you very much for your time and your efforts today. If you have any exhibits, just give those to the state as we walk out. Thank you very much, sir.
I think I managed to return them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, sir.